Hey, everybody. Welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We are talking about youth and addiction. It is a conversation that comes up quite frequently among parents, talking about how to keep kids away from drugs, away from substances, away from addiction. In this episode, we'll be talking about just how young drug use is beginning with kids. You won't believe how young. It's kind of crazy. We'll talk about the effect of the isolation in this pandemic and how it has affected youth, particularly teenagers who've gone, for as long as a year and a half now, really not engaging socially as they're intended to with their peers. And we'll talk about prevention as well. How do we keep kids engaged in positive activities and away from the type of substances that really can harm them and tank their life and impact their life in dramatically negative ways. Our guest in this episode is the Director of Youth and Family Services at Fora Health Treatment and Recovery. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified alcohol and drug counselor. Joining us live is Naomi Castor. Naomi, thanks so much for being on That Expert Show.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks for having me.
Let's begin by talking about just how young it really happens. You see young people come into your office, you are treating people, and you're having conversations with them about the first time they tried an illegal substance. What are we talking about? I think of maybe 12 or 13-year-olds, but I think you're saying that it can begin much younger than that.
Yes, Anna, that is what we're seeing. They come into our office anywhere from ages 14 to 18 to do the intake. And what we're seeing when we ask them about their first time of exposure and also their first time with experimentation is often, but yeah, absolutely much younger than you would think in the elementary school ages, sometimes 8 and 9. And it's can be exposure from older family members, from school, from their friends and influences around them, their friends and circles, their social groups. So it is very young.
And what can you go into a little more detail about, that first time? What are they trying and how does that look? Is it that they are opening a pill cabinet and popping a pill just to see how it feels, or they're at a sleepover? What are the scenarios that you hear about with kids that are in your treatment program?
At the intake, we typically don't ask so much how they got it, just what they're using and how young they're using at age of first exposure as part of the questioning. The addictions counselors often ask further questioning throughout their treatment, and they'll ask them, is it coming from friends and family? Some of it's legal for someone else, just not for them. So like, for example, marijuana being legal in Oregon is not illegal for an adult to take, even recreationally, but for them it is illegal. Same with cigarettes and alcohol. And I think we're asking them mostly just to find out what they're going to do when they get out. So if they're getting it from these friend circles, how are they going to respond when they're getting out of treatment and they're back in those friend circles? So the context that we're typically asking them is to try to help them with their recovery and their recovery planning.
How quickly can a teen become actually addicted to a substance? I mean, I would imagine that for some, if they have, a particular genetic history that, makes them more addictive than others, it would only take once or twice for them to go down that trail. But for others, is it something that takes, more than that, like 5 to 10 uses, and then they're hooked, and then physiologically their body becomes dependent on it or is craving that substance?
That's a really great question. It's like the ingredients of a cake, right? You need all the ingredients to make the full cake. And so we're looking at genetic predisposition. We're looking at socioeconomic status. We're looking at influences inside and outside of the family. We're looking at mental health, co-occurring mental health, and particularly co-occurring trauma and the reactions to that trauma. So there's lots of different factors that play into how quickly they're going to begin using regularly, and or becoming addicted. And of course, that also depends on the substance. Many people use marijuana, and although it's not physiologically hard to stop marijuana, psychologically it can be very hard. And oftentimes these youth are using the substances, regardless of what the substance is, to cope with whatever life stressor they're experiencing. So whether that's the mental health, whether that's some kind of trauma history, whether that's normal stressors that we all experience in school settings. So there's always something usually underlying that addiction, and that's their go-to coping skill. So our jobs then become to try to help them find other more effective and more positive coping skills throughout their treatment with us and also beyond.
Isn't it, correct me if I'm wrong here, but with teenagers, first of all, I would hate to be a teenager these days. I think it's way more stressful now to be a teenager than it ever has been, with all of the pressures of social media and comparison and everything that is going on in their lives, and just kind of like the pace of life. I feel for kids these days and everything that is thrown at them. So I understand why it would be tempting to want to medicate that, I guess, with something. But yes, finding better ways to cope with the stresses, even of a normal teenage life versus like trauma, would be obviously ideal. Can we talk a little bit about the adolescent brain, though? Because
Sure.
Isn't the adolescent brain more disposed to crave that feeling of euphoria versus somebody who has a fully developed brain? It's almost like in the adolescent brain, once you introduce something to it, and it could be a high from something else, it could be a high from
Right.
a roller coaster or a really positive activity, winning a sports championship or something like that. There's something about that brain that really locks into that feeling and then wants to try and replicate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that here. That's why we work so hard to replace something else that's going to give them that high, like exercising. That's a big one. We use sports, we use exercise. We encourage them to do things in the school setting that are going to give them that natural high, so to speak. But going back to your question about the adolescent brain, I think definitely adolescents are at very high risk, and even younger than adolescent are at very high risk of developing an addiction earlier on because of that, because of the partially developed brain and everything that comes with that, like you're describing, just that thrill seeking, that sense. I'm chuckling because I have my own children at home. That sense of invincibility that we all had as teenagers, that teenagers continue to have, that nothing's going to hurt them. They're untouchable. So I think that all of those factors play into what we're seeing here with an increased substance use issue in youth.
Naomi, can you help us understand? I mean, I've seen the headlines and I've read the stories about fentanyl and prescription drug use and counterfeit pills. It's like a whole layer of addictive substances that I'm personally not very familiar with, and yet I've read about how dangerous this can be. Can you help me paint the picture of what is beyond the alcohol and the pot now, and the danger that it poses to the young people that are trying this out and thinking, oh, it's just a pill, it's just a Xanax, and then, lo and behold, they're dead the next day because they didn't know this was a counterfeit and it was laced with something else?
That's a great question. What we're seeing at Fora is, again, we're seeing lots of different substances being used, lots of exposure to different substances at a young age. When I think back to when I was young, it was like a really big deal that someone used marijuana and alcohol, and now that's actually not even the most dangerous of what's being used out there. So I know when we talk to our youth anyways, we speak to them about what they're using, and we're often seeing them using much heavier hitting substances. And I'm, again, not sure where they're getting them, if this is somebody else has them legally that they're around, or if they're purchasing them off the street. But we are seeing reports of greater increase in use at younger ages of Xanax and opiates.
Gosh, that is really, really concerning. It's interesting that during the pandemic, as we were talking before the interview, you weren't seeing the referrals come in that you would during non-pandemic times. You weren't seeing, parents calling up and saying, my kid has a substance abuse problem. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that kids weren't using.
Right. No, absolutely. The youth that are coming in now, and honestly, since school has started back in session in Oregon, we are seeing much larger referrals coming in, even just for our youth program. Just to give an example, last year at this time, we had less than 5 at one point, and now we're getting referrals and we have a waiting list. So it didn't seem to me then, and it doesn't seem now based on the reports that we're getting with the youth coming in now, that the substance use actually stopped. In many cases, we're getting reports from the youth that are here now that their substance use got worse during the pandemic because of them feeling isolated, having less resources, the activities that they were engaged in school, football and sports and different things, theater, things that they were engaged in had all stopped. And it was, it was necessary to do this, but we were down to the bare bones of just the Zoom courses. And I think when all those things were taken away, the youth are reporting their substance use increased because they were left sort of feeling they didn't have very much stimulation. So nothing really stopped, even though we saw the decrease in referrals. And I think what and what our team thinks is that there just weren't as many eyes on those youth. There just weren't as many people that would typically go to the parents and say, hey, I'm kind of seeing that so-and-so has a problem. I'm seeing an increase in isolation. I'm seeing depression, things like that. And I'm not sure how accessible school resource counselors have been during the pandemic. But certainly it doesn't appear that anything stopped or slowed down. We just weren't seeing the referrals.
I see. I think that's important to point out. For parents who are watching this, you mentioned that you've got kids of your own. What are the warning signs? I know this is one of those questions that seems like it has an obvious answer, but what would you want parents to know that they need to take note of and to start asking a lot more questions and to raise an eyebrow and be concerned?
Yeah, I think like we talked about briefly, just getting to know the people that your youth are around, getting to know them, getting to know the families, finding out, who are the influences, because with teenage daughters at home, I know that I can't always be sure that they're going to come to me with a problem. As a teenager, they're likely to go to their friends first. And so who are those friends? Who are those supports? Who are the ones that are influencing their decisions? And that would involve the things that the schools talk to all of us parents about, which is monitoring their social media, monitoring their calls, kind of seeing just where they're going. And like we discussed, it is sort of a fine line because this is a time that they are developing that independence. So it needs to be handled carefully, I think, in a lot of ways. But I think asking those questions, finding out what's going on, and looking for the warning signs of withdrawing. Are they withdrawing from activities? Are they severing relationships? Are they isolating? What are the things that they're doing that looks different than it did when they were younger?
It's interesting too, because I know I grew up in, a time period where it was the just say no to drugs generation. And we know now that that is a great slogan, but it's not really effective. So in communities where you've seen successful mitigation efforts and prevention efforts and a downscaling of drug use among teens, what are some of the common activities that you see families engaging in that, keep the likelihood of kids using down?
That's a really great question. I'm laughing a little bit to myself because the staff and I just had that conversation that you just had about that we were part of the DARE and the Just Say No. And luckily for many of us, it was effective, for some not so much. But I think what it really comes down to is that communication, that openness, that leaving that space in the family for someone in the family to say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, and then acknowledge some of that. And I think there's a temptation for older generations like myself, we came from like the pick yourself up by your bootstraps generation and, just get her done. And that doesn't always work. And so leaving that space for families with their youth to talk about what's really going on and really listen and offer that support that's needed.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it is a generational shift. I think like you, I take heart in the idea that young people today seem a little more open about talking about their depression or talking about their anxiety. I have a stepdaughter that we just dropped off at Oregon State yesterday, in fact, and one of the first things that she said to the girls that she was meeting across the hall in her dorm was, I felt so anxious leading into this day. And I could visibly see the girls she was meeting like sigh, like they physically responded to what she said and said, I've been so nervous too, you too, like I've been anxious. And just to kind of call that out and be open and talk about it and not have so much stigma around the bad feelings, because there are no such things as bad feelings, there's just feelings. Right. I think it's a huge step in that direction. I know we talk a lot in society about, we overschedule our kids. We take them to too many organized sports. We're too involved in their lives. We need to give them some freedom to like be autonomous and do what they want to do like we had. But do you also find that communities where there is a high level of parental engagement, in those types of activities, whether it's the arts or sports or academics, that can be a positive factor in reducing the addiction rate?
I mean, absolutely. What we see here at Fora is a much higher success with the youth who have some level of family or guardianship engagement in their treatment. And we see youth really across the board with different family situations. So it doesn't have to be the parents, but just somebody in that family that's really supportive and engaged in their treatment and following through with sessions, helping set up the aftercare for when they get out of our treatment center. That level of engagement usually lends itself to higher success rates, is what we're seeing at Fora. Also, I like what you're saying about engagement in activities, because that always, I think, increases the chance of successful recovery after this program, is having them engaged in something outside of just home and school, which, again, during the pandemic has been very difficult. But getting involved in sports or activities, social clubs. We have a chess club here on site. A lot of our youth really like to do chess after school.
I love that. Yeah, I have family members that are convinced. I mean, they're just constantly running around from, sport to sport. They've got 3 kids, but the conversations we have are that, hey, they're saying like, as long as those kids are busy, going from one type of practice to another and then to a game, it's almost like, when are they going to have time to go and engage in activities that are negative, because they just have them plugged into everything that is positive. We can talk about, again, overscheduling kids and whatnot, but I can sort of see the logic of that. And not just that, because I mean, I guess the people that I really feel for, which I know, this is a reality for many of us growing up, frankly, single parent households where the single parent is the one who's having to work all the time. You don't have the luxury of being that constant presence in your kid's daily life, because you're just trying to like make a living and provide food and shelter for the kid. Situations where, kids are marginalized and impoverished, I think the challenge is that much greater for families who are in that sort of situation and facing those challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see that at Fora with any, traditionally marginalized populations are at a higher risk of addiction and also mental health issues, and oftentimes at a higher risk of not reaching out for services because of the way that they've been treated in the community. So that extends to our LGBTQ plus and also our BIPOC communities. We're seeing that that's a higher risk because of all the stigma and social factors.
Is it a myth, though, that, because this is always something that I kind of heard growing up, that, oh, the kids in the rich communities, they also do drugs. They just have more money from their parents to buy better drugs, and actually their drug problems are just as prevalent. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, we see youth across the socioeconomic spectrum. I wouldn't say that their money prevents them from having addiction problems. I just think that oftentimes their resources are a little different because of their coming from a place of privilege. I think I wouldn't say that their access to drugs is necessarily better, and in some cases that might actually be a much more negative thing because they have more resources to purchase drugs. But we don't really see one specific demographic here at Fora. We see pretty much across the board.
Okay. Anything else that you really wanted to get across today that you want to leave, families with, just a piece of advice that we can all take with us?
I guess I would just recap what I said before, which is for families to really try to leave that space for these conversations and those difficult communications that might occur. Ask for help. If parents aren't sure how to navigate these types of conversations, find a therapist that can help them walk through it. And really, more than anything, I also just see having these conversations even earlier than we think we should, just to normalize them, not just the substance use, but also the mental health piece. Normalizing, like you said, it's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel depressed, and just start a lot earlier than maybe our parents did with us, because it's a different generation.
Yeah, I can tell you that my mom wasn't doing a lot of I statements when I was growing up. It was a lot more shaming and guilting. God bless her. I love her. Very traditional, Taiwanese style of raising children. But, I think there is an opportunity for parents to parent in a more evolved way that, recognizes their kids' feelings instead of trying to silence them.
Right.
Naomi, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your information and your time for being on That Expert Show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you for joining me for this episode. Boy, that was a lot of great information. We will be summarizing Naomi's key points in a tip sheet that we always put out after each show. It'll be posted on thatexpertshow.com. You can also check out other episodes that we've covered. We've done, almost 90. I think this is our 90th episode. They're all posted on YouTube. We also kick them out to you as podcasts on Apple Play or Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Connect with us on social media. I'm on Facebook at Anna Canzano, Anna_Canzano on Twitter, as well as Instagram. Let me know if you've got ideas for topics you'd like me to tackle or guests that you want me to interview. I love that it's always a dialogue. It's a two-way conversation, and I appreciate your thoughts and your input. It's what makes this show really tick. So it is That Expert Show, and it's on Monday nights at 7 o'clock, and it's where you help run the show.